My name is Katherine Mills. I'm 43 years old, and I'm a United States Navy Admiral, or at least I used to be. Today I'm standing alone at the edge of a crowd in Arlington Memorial Garden. The grass is wet from last night's rain, and my boots, old scuffed the same ones I wore in my last deployment, are soaked through. To the people gathered here, I'm invisible. They don't see the woman who's led missions across 3 continents. They only see my torn coat, my sun-creased face, and the weight I carry in silence. They think I'm just a drifter who wandered into the wrong funeral. Except it's not just any funeral. It's my grandfather's award ceremony, a posthumous tribute to Rear Admiral Thomas Mills, a war hero and my personal North Star. But I'm not welcome here, and my brother made that very clear. She's just a homeless veteran, Nathan announced to the circle of polished shoes and pressed suits. She doesn't belong here. There was a pause. Not one voice rose to defend me. Not even my mother. Not even Uncle Hugh, who used to bounce me on his knee when I was 5 and told me I had the eyes of a leader. They all looked away. I felt like I had during the stormy nights in the North Pacific, drenched, rattled, and fighting not to flinch. Nathan stepped closer. He was dressed immaculately, as always, his tie pin gleaming in the morning sun. "You left this family when you walked into the Navy," he hissed. "You embarrassed us. Don't think you can come back here for photo ops and medals." I could smell the cologne on his suit. It was the same brand Grandpa used to wear. I clenched my jaw. "I didn't come here for a photo op. I came to honor Grandpa." He scoffed. "You think anyone believes that? Look at you. You're a disgrace. You don't even have a place to live." That part was true. I had resigned my commission 6 months ago. I'd chosen to walk away from the noise, the bureaucracy, the politics. I wanted peace. But the world doesn't have much room for people who've stepped out of the machine. I had been living out of my truck. Voluntarily, but still technically, I was homeless. Still, I stood straight as we were taught in Annapolis. I didn't give him the reaction he wanted. Instead, I looked past him, toward the podium, toward the framed portrait of Grandpa dressed in full uniform with the same proud fire in his eyes that I once carried in mine. I had hoped they would let me speak. Just a few words, a memory, a thank you. But when I arrived, the event coordinator told me my name wasn't on the list. Family requested it, she said, her eyes apologetic but firm. Family. That word used to mean everything to me. Now it felt like a gate locked from the inside. So I stood there soaking wet, unwanted, listening to strangers eulogize the man who taught me to tie a sailor's knot and whisper, "Courage, Katie." Courage is not the absence of fear, it's doing what's right while you're afraid. Nathan took the podium. His voice rang out with false reverence. He had never worn a uniform a day in his life. I looked around. A few people glanced my way. Most didn't. I reached into my coat pocket and touched the small metal pin inside a rusted silver submarine badge. Grandpa had given it to me the day I got my officer commission. Then, just as Nathan raised his glass for the final toast, a rumble cut through the sky. At first, no one noticed. Just a low thrum like thunder rolling in from the east. But then the sound grew louder, closer. People began to look up. Chairs creaked. Napkins fluttered. A breeze swept through the lawn, scattering rose petals from the wreaths. And then it appeared. A military helicopter. Low, dark, fast. Its blades slicing through the morning silence. Gasps rose from the crowd. A few guests shielded their eyes from the downwash. Nathan stepped back from the podium, mouth ajar. The helicopter circled once and descended right onto the open field behind the ceremony. The ground shook beneath our feet. Dust spun into the air. Then the side door slid open. Out stepped a tall man in full Navy SEAL dress blues. He didn't look around, didn't pause. He walked straight toward me. The crowd parted, stunned into silence. Some pulled out their phones. Others just stood, frozen eyes darting between him and me. He stopped 2 feet away. Then he did something that shattered every assumption anyone in that field had about me. He saluted. Sharp, clean, perfect form. Then he spoke. "Ma'am Admiral," he said, voice firm, "we need you now." For a second, no one breathed. I returned the salute, my arm moving on muscle memory. Then I nodded. "Understood. Mission." He leaned in, lowered his voice. "Classified, ma'am, but urgent. Black Sea deployment." Nathan's face drained of color. I heard someone whisper, "Admiral, did he say?" Admiral the SEAL nodded toward the aircraft. "Chopper's hot. We've got 5 minutes." I turned back to the podium. To Grandpa's portrait. I walked calmly, deliberately toward the front. I reached into my pocket, took out the old submarine pin. I placed it gently at the base of his frame. "Thank you, Grandpa," I whispered, "for teaching me to stand tall even when standing alone." Then I stood at attention and saluted, for the man who had given me everything, and for the people who thought I was nothing. Without a glance at Nathan or my mother or the whispers behind me, I turned on my heel. I walked toward the chopper, and as the wind roared around us and the blades blurred into motion, I climbed in. The door slid shut, and just before it did, I saw it, Nathan, standing alone, holding a champagne glass, mouth open, eyes wide, finally seeing me, not as a homeless veteran, but as a woman they had never truly known. "My name is Katherine Mills. I was born in Charleston, South Carolina, but the Navy made me belong to no particular place, just the sea and the stars. Before they ever called me Admiral Mills, before the ribbons and commands, I was a girl raised in a home that never felt like home. My mother used to tell people I was a difficult daughter. She meant I wasn't interested in pageants or piano recitals. I wanted to climb trees, dismantle radios, and read maps of wars no one else remembered. My father left when I was 9. My older brother Nathan filled the silence with expectations I never met. There was only one person who didn't try to change me, my grandfather, Jonathan Mills. A veteran of World War II, he smelled of pipe tobacco and sea wind. He saw something in me, something even I hadn't seen yet. When I got accepted to the U.S. Naval Academy, it was Grandpa who cashed in an old savings bond to buy my first officer's shoes. But I didn't need the money. I had earned a full scholarship, the Admiral Cushing Honor Award, for a written thesis on tactical maritime rescue protocols. Grandpa framed the acceptance letter, then stood silently as I saluted him before boarding the bus to Annapolis. He didn't say, "I'm proud of you." He didn't have to. Training was brutal. Few women made it past the second round of assessments. Even fewer reached the top 15. I ranked 11th. Not best, but among the best. That's all I ever needed. By the time I turned 27, I was a commissioned officer and had completed 3 Black Ops intelligence assignments in Southeast Asia. At 30, I was promoted to lieutenant commander and had started working under Joint Special Operations. But back home, my accomplishments were unmentionable. Nathan once told me I had embarrassed the family by becoming military meat. Mom refused to hang my graduation photo on the wall. "You were supposed to marry a lawyer, not act like one," she said. I still don't know what that means. By then I had stopped visiting home altogether, but Grandpa kept writing. His letters were typed in courier font, folded into 3 neat creases, and always signed the same way: "Keep your compass true. Love, J.M." Then came the mission in Syria. I was embedded with a classified SEAL reconnaissance unit outside Al-Hasaka province. Our orders were surgical secure. A high-value hostage, eliminate non-compliant resistance, no civilian casualties. Clean entry, clean exit. It was never clean. I don't remember the explosion, just the heat. The air got sucked out of my lungs, and when I opened my eyes, everything was muffled and blinking. Someone was screaming, either me or a radio operator. A wall of sand swallowed our extraction chopper before it could land. We were stranded. One of our men, Dominguez, had lost both legs. I applied the tourniquet myself. He didn't make it. In the confusion, our team was separated. By nightfall, I was presumed missing in action. Command blacked out all further details. My file was sealed. 2 days later, I was found in a half-collapsed schoolhouse by a UN relief medic who didn't know who I was. Neither did I for a while. The brain injury caused temporary amnesia along with partial hearing loss in one ear. I was evacuated to Ramstein, Germany, under protective alias. The Department of Defense labeled me Level 4 Protective Recovery. Only 2 people in the entire system had access to my location. I stayed at the military hospital for nearly 9 months. During that time, I relearned motor coordination, speech clarity, and underwent 3 surgeries to remove shrapnel from my left leg and back. I never received a single card or call from my family. Later, I learned they had held a closed-door memorial service for me, a woman they never really knew and perhaps never wanted to. I was alive, but it didn't feel like it. During my rehabilitation, an offer came from the Pentagon: accept full medical retirement, and an honorary burial right in Arlington or return under a new capacity as a strategic advisor. I declined both. What I wanted wasn't a title or a grave or another plaque. I wanted silence, space, anonymity. I changed my name on civilian records, dropped my military pension, bought a second-hand van in Pennsylvania, and drove west until the country turned dry and the names of places sounded like wind. For 3 years, I moved from county to county volunteering at veteran clinics under an assumed identity. I earned enough to eat and sleep indoors when needed. Other times I parked the van near riverbeds and cooked over cans. No one recognized me. That was the plan. But every year I would pause on my grandfather's birthday. I'd call the number that never answered. I'd imagine his voice on the other side. When I finally found out about the award ceremony, Grandpa's posthumous Congressional Gold Medal, I hadn't even known he passed. He died 6 months prior. The event was meant to honor his legacy, his war record, his decades of service to the nation and our family. Nathan was listed as the keynote speaker. My mother was organizing catering. I wasn't even on the guest list. Still I went. In my old uniform, stitched up and faded. One of the ribbons was crooked. I didn't care. The world had moved on. But my compass hadn't. And as I stood there on the edge of the gathering, overlooked, underestimated my brother's voice, cut across the silence like a slap to the soul. She's just a homeless veteran. She doesn't belong here. But before I could respond, the sky began to tremble, and everything changed again. I was eating dinner alone in a corner booth at a small diner in Annapolis when I saw it. The local paper, thin and cheap, had been left behind by another customer. I reached for it out of habit. The front page didn't interest me. Politics, a scandal, a new marina opening. But then on page 6 in the Community and Legacy section, I saw the headline, War Hero and Naval Legend to be honored posthumously at National Ceremony. And there it was. His name, Rear Admiral Joseph Emery Mills, my grandfather. There was a photo of him in his younger years, square-jawed, dignified in his whites, the kind of picture they used in official portraits. I ran my fingers slowly over the page as if I could touch him through the paper. My throat tightened. I read the article twice, maybe 3 times. There it was in black and white. There would be a public ceremony at the Navy Memorial Plaza next Saturday. A tribute to his decades of service to the legacy he left behind. Even a brass band, an honor guard. They would be presenting his Distinguished Service Medal to a member of the family. But my name was not mentioned. Not once. Not in the list of surviving family members. Not in the acknowledgments. Not even in the footnotes. Instead, it was Nathan the Golden Boy. He would be speaking, representing the family, accepting the award. I folded the paper slowly, deliberately. Then I placed it down and stared into my coffee until it went cold. I didn't expect to be mentioned like a celebrity, but I had earned that place. He was the only one in my family who had ever believed in me. The one who had pushed me toward the Naval Academy. The one who had taught me to swim and told me that discipline mattered more than luck. The one who had cried openly when I pinned on my first rank. I left the diner and walked 6 blocks to a payphone. I could have used my burner cell, but something in me wanted to do it old school, like he would have. I dialed the house number, the same number it had always been. The one I used to call on holidays before the silence between us had hardened into something colder. It rang twice. Then she answered. My mother. Hello, her voice was as crisp and polished as ever. It's me, I said. My voice was calm, but my heart was pounding. Katherine. A pause. A long, unmistakable pause. I saw the paper. I added. About Grandpa's ceremony. Another pause. Yes, she said simply. I'd like to come. Her exhale was barely audible, but I caught it. Like someone preparing to be diplomatic with a reporter. I don't think that's a good idea, she said. Why not? Because your presence would cause a scene. You know how people talk, Katherine. You've been gone. People assumed the worst. Some of us tried to explain. Nathan even told them you were in Europe volunteering or whatever lie you made us come up with. But now is not the time to resurface. I'm his granddaughter, I said. The one he actually believed in. Her voice sharpened. And look where that got you, living in shadows, popping up like a ghost. You think this day is about you? It's about him. And he would have wanted me there. No, Katherine. He would have wanted peace. I laughed once bitterly. You don't get to speak for him." She went quiet for a beat, and then she delivered the line that I would carry with me all the way to the ceremony. "Don't make a fool of yourself, or of him. Don't show up looking like you've been living under a bridge. Don't embarrass your grandfather on the day we honor him." It was like she'd slapped me, but calmly, elegantly, surgically. I didn't say goodbye, I just hung up the phone, and for the first time in years I cried. Not for myself, but for the little girl who once clutched that man's uniform sleeve and asked if girls could command ships too. I wiped my face dry, looked up at the evening sky, and whispered, "I'm coming anyway, Grandpa. Even if they hate it. Even if they hate me." The day before the ceremony, I made my decision. Quietly, carefully, without telling anyone, I packed the one thing I still had from him, a small, worn, brass submarine pin. My grandfather gave it to me when I graduated from the Naval Academy. "You'll command deep things one day," he whispered. "But never forget where you surfaced." He was the only one who ever believed in me without condition. I wasn't going for them, not my brother, not my mother. I was going for him. To pay my respects, to return the badge he once called my compass. I didn't care if my name wasn't on the list. I didn't care if no one welcomed me. I just wanted to stand in the same space as his medal for a second. Just one. I didn't own a dress, so I wore my cleanest jeans, a black shirt, and the only pair of boots that hadn't fallen apart. I braided my hair the way he liked, neat and over my left shoulder. Then I walked to the bus stop and rode for hours, switching lines, crossing cities, keeping to myself. When I finally arrived, the gate stood taller than I remembered. Banners hung across the entry with my grandfather's name in gold. His portrait was printed 10 feet high, younger than I'd last seen him, with his navy whites, spotless and sharp. I took a breath. My fingers held the pin in my pocket like it was the last piece of gravity. But as I approached the security check, the guard raised a hand. "Name, Katherine Mills." He glanced at the list, flipped a few pages, then shook his head. "You're not on the registry." "I know," I replied. "But my grandfather is being honored today." "I understand, ma'am," he interrupted, not unkindly. "But if you're not cleared, I can't let you in." Orders from the family. I stood there swallowing air that suddenly tasted sour. "Could I speak to someone? Just a minute. My mother's inside." He tapped his earpiece, spoke quietly, then nodded. "Someone's on their way." 2 minutes later, Nathan walked out, dressed in a tailored navy suit, perfectly groomed. He didn't look surprised to see me. If anything, he looked annoyed that I hadn't taken the hint. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice low. "I came to pay my respects," I answered. "I brought the pin." Nathan's eyes flicked to my pocket like it was radioactive. "You're not welcome, Katherine. I don't want to cause anything. I won't go inside. I just want to leave the pin next to the medal. Please?" He glanced back toward the entrance, then stepped closer. "Don't make this about you," he hissed. "Today is about Grandpa. Don't ruin that. You walking around looking like this, it's embarrassing." I looked down at myself. My worn jeans, my frayed cuffs, my scuffed boots. The quiet I had learned to live in started rising inside me again. "You called me a disgrace when I enlisted," I reminded him. "I served for 17 years. You never asked once if I was alive." Nathan didn't flinch. "We thought you were dead. That was easier." He turned to leave but stopped one more time. "I already asked security to make sure you stay off the premises. You're not part of this anymore." I watched him walk away, just like he did the day I left home for the academy. And just like that, the gate closed between us again. I sat on the bench across the street. Alone, clutching the submarine pin like a relic. Guests arrived in waves, suits and medals and laughter. I watched from the shadows, invisible. It was fitting, I suppose. But just as the master of ceremony stepped up to the podium and began to speak, a sharp hum filled the air. Everyone stopped and looked up. The helicopter was fast low, loud military gray, and heading directly toward the lawn. Gasps rose from the crowd. Programs fluttered to the ground. Hair and hats whipped in the downwash as the bird descended. The moment its skids kissed the grass, the side door slid open and a man stepped out. Tall, broad, dressed in Navy SEAL fatigues. He wore 4 stars on his collar. He didn't hesitate, didn't look around, just marched purposefully through the stunned assembly. Straight toward me, people turned, faces moved, a path opened. He stopped right in front of me, the crowd holding their breath. "Ma'am," he said with a sharp salute, "Admiral Mills, we need you now." And suddenly every eye, every voice, every memory that once called me nothing stood silent in the presence of truth. My truth. The bench beneath me disappeared. My past dissolved in the thrum of rotor blades. Because in that instant I wasn't a daughter, I wasn't a sister, I wasn't a ghost. I was exactly who he said I was, Admiral. They called it a silent war, one where names weren't remembered and faces weren't shown, where even medals were mailed, not presented. I didn't wear a nameplate during those years, not even on base. I was referred to by initials or codes, depending on where we were stationed. But the ones who mattered knew who I was, and more importantly, they trusted me to lead. I was 32 when I was promoted to Rear Admiral, lower half a title. Few women held even fewer, under seal of absolute confidentiality. My advisory role wasn't just in planning. I was the final sign-off on surgical strikes, the voice in the satellite room calling go or no go. The unit I worked with wasn't on record. We weren't supposed to exist. Even our casualties, when they happened, were ghosts. But ghosts leave stains. There was a mission, we called it Ghostlight. It was supposed to be routine. Infiltrate a weapons transfer site on the edge of Kurdish-controlled territory in Syria, extract 2 rogue engineers who had knowledge of biochemical payload delivery. We planned it for months. Every entry point, wind direction, civilian radius accounted for. It was airtight. Until it wasn't. 12 hours before execution, one of our own, a logistics officer, altered the drop coordinates. Not much, just enough to place us in a live-fire zone, manned by an unknown militia cell. 2 of my men were hit instantly. I still remembered Jackson's voice through the comm, half of it, cut by static, the other half blood. We fought our way out. I stayed back with Cruz. He was too injured to run. We hid in a collapsed structure until sundown. That night, when I finally dragged him across the border into a safe zone, I looked up and knew something in me had changed forever. Cruz died 2 days later. When we returned, I asked for a full internal review. They denied it, said data corruption must have caused the change. I knew better. I could see the fear in their eyes, not fear of what happened, but fear of who might be exposed. The betrayal came from within. We were sacrificial pawns in someone's chain of command game. And just like that, the honor I once believed in felt tainted. I didn't accept the 2nd star. They called me to the Pentagon weeks later, offered a quiet promotion, a larger advisory role, a shift to DC, where my name would finally mean something. I said no. I packed my things. I left the compound. I signed my papers. I handed over my ID badge and walked out with only a duffel and a folded American flag. I disappeared. No press release, no ceremony, not even a thank you from my commanding officer. It wasn't bitterness, it wasn't spite, it was clarity. For years I believed we were serving a greater good. And while much of that was true, the machinery behind it, the shadows, the politics, the decisions made in closed-door rooms, it broke something in me. Not my sense of duty, but my faith in the institution. I spent the next few months volunteering anonymously at a vet center in New Mexico. There was something healing about serving in silence. No uniforms, no chain of command, just shared stories over black coffee and folding chairs. People think walking away means weakness, but sometimes it's the strongest thing you can do, to choose peace over vindication. Still, part of me never stopped watching. I kept a burner phone just for defense notifications. I trained every morning at 5 a.m. I stayed ready, not for war, but for something I couldn't name. That's why when the helicopter landed at Grandpa's ceremony, I didn't flinch. That commander didn't salute the version of me my family knew, the woman they whispered about, the disgrace, who vanished, the homeless veteran too ashamed to show her face. He saluted the one who never needed a parade, the one who stayed behind with Cruz when she didn't have to, the one who said no when it would have been easier to say yes, the one who carried ghosts not as burdens, but as reminders of what leadership really meant. I never expected them to know the truth. Maybe they didn't deserve to. But in that moment, in the silence before he spoke, I remembered Ghostlight. I remembered the betrayal. I remembered the fire in my chest as I crawled through rubble clutching Cruz's hand. And I remembered why I left. Not because I gave up, but because I knew who I really was. And now, so did they. The moment I stepped into the armored vehicle with Commander Voss, I knew it wasn't just about me. It was about something far bigger. We drove in silence away from the crowd, still frozen in disbelief. From the window, I could still see my mother shaking her head as if refusing to believe the truth, even when it had landed in a chopper in front of her. Nathan looked pale. He had always imagined himself the future of the family. But I was the one the Navy called back. Voss handed me a sealed envelope. My name was written on it, but not in my mother's handwriting, not Nathan's. It was Grandpa's. I recognized the angular slant of the K. The paper smelled like engine oil and old leather. Before he passed, Voss said, "Your grandfather left something. Only you can decipher it." I opened the envelope slowly, inside a weathered page from an old Navy logbook. Symbols, coordinates, and a cipher wheel sketch. My heart tightened. "I remember this," I whispered. "It's his old emergency protocol. He taught it to me when I was 10 during that summer at Norfolk before I left for Annapolis." Voss nodded. "Then you're the only one who can crack it." Back at the Mobile Ops Center, I sat down in front of the secure console. The room smelled of cold metal and urgency. I could hear the hum of encrypted transmissions in the background, the buzz of crisis. They were trying to stop a cyber breach into our naval AI systems, something that, if successful, could reroute nuclear subs. I stared at the cipher. Grandpa had commanded submarines during the Cold War. He wasn't just a sailor. He was an architect of strategic silence, the kind of man who understood that the loudest victories often came from the quietest rooms. I began decoding. It started with letters, then shifted to numbers, then back to glyphs I hadn't seen since that rainy afternoon on his porch when he first taught me how to read invisible ink. Each mark on the page triggered a memory. Grandpa's hand on mine. His voice, "Someday you'll have to save them even when they don't believe in you." 32 minutes in, I broke the sequence. "It's a kill switch," I muttered. A remote code embedded in the 1987 OS architecture of a now-revived subroutine. "Whoever's trying to hack us doesn't know Grandpa wrote a trapdoor." Voss leaned in. "Can you trigger it?" "Yes. But I need biometric authentication from someone on the original command team." Voss opened a file, already secured. He made sure to leave it with a sealed recording. "For you," the screen flickered. Grandpa appeared much older, thinner, but his voice was unmistakable. "If you're watching this, Katie, then I'm gone. And that means someone's tried to open the wrong vault." My throat tightened. "You were always the best of us, not because you were the smartest, but because you listened. And you never gave up. I knew they'd forget you, but I never did." The message ended. I sat in silence. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a ghost. I initiated the kill switch. The entire command center lit up. A digital firewall activated, locking out the breach. Within seconds, the threat was neutralized. Cheers erupted, but I didn't smile. I just reached into my pocket and took out the old submarine pin Grandpa had given me, the same one I was supposed to leave beside his medal. I pressed it to my heart. "I kept your watch, Grandpa," I whispered. Voss looked at me with quiet respect. "Ma'am, the secretary wants to speak to you." I stood. "Tell her I'll call once I've buried my grandfather properly." Outside, the skies were clearing. I stepped into the light, not as a forgotten veteran, not as the homeless woman they mocked, but as the Admiral he raised me to be. And I was just getting started. I didn't look back when we reached the edge of the crowd. The SEAL commander was still at my side, his silence steady, respectful. The wind kicked up dust and scattered petals from the floral tributes laid for my grandfather's ceremony. But something in me resisted moving forward. He stopped too. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "we're ready to lift off." I shook my head slowly. "Just a moment." And I turned back toward the sea of chairs arranged in neat rows. The podium, the folded flags, the empty seat where my name never appeared. I saw my brother Nathan's stunned expression, saw my mother clutching her pearls paling beneath her hat. But I didn't walk toward them. I walked toward the table set beneath the American flag. My boots, old-worn, polished from memory more than habit, hit the pavement in solid cadence. Every step was a choice. I passed the first row, then the second. No one said a word. No one moved. Even the photographer's shutter fell silent. The murmurs had died out. The gossip had choked itself still. What was left was only the sound of presence, the awareness of something no one had expected. In my hand was the small wooden box. Not ornate, just plain and clean. Inside, cushioned by velvet, was the submarine warfare insignia, my grandfather's. He'd earned it as a young officer during the Cold War, deployed in silence beneath oceans, reading enemy intentions in sonar and steel. When I graduated from Annapolis, he placed it in my palm. For you, he said, because you go where others don't. Like we all must. I hadn't opened the box since. Now I set it down on the table beside his folded uniform. It made no sound, no grand declaration. But its presence, just like his, was unmistakable. I didn't speak. There was nothing to say. Instead, I turned toward the flag. I drew myself up to full posture, years of muscle memory taking over. And I raised my right hand, my fingers slicing the air in the same salute he had given me the day I deployed for the first time. I held it, longer than any regulation required, longer than anyone expected, long enough for them to feel it, not just see it. That salute was not for them. It was for him, the man who believed in me when no one else did, the man who never once asked me to shrink, the man who gave me my name back when the world tried to erase it. I heard someone sob, soft, involuntary. I lowered my hand and stepped back. And still no one moved. No one dared. Not even Nathan. Not even my mother. I didn't wait for applause. There wouldn't be any, and I didn't need it. Because this moment wasn't about them. It was about honoring the person who saw the whole of me, flaws and brilliance and fight. I turned again, my coat catching the breeze as I walked past the stunned rows of silence. The SEAL commander opened the door of the waiting vehicle. He didn't say a word. Neither did I. But before I stepped inside, I looked up at the flag one more time. One final glance at the ceremony I was never meant to attend. And in that moment, I realized something. This wasn't about being allowed in. It was about walking in anyway. It was about returning not with vengeance, but with truth. And placing something sacred where it always belonged. Not a medal, not a speech, but a symbol of lineage, of service, of love, and legacy. The kind no invitation could ever define. The kind they could never take away. So I left, but not empty-handed. I carried something deeper, now. Peace. Because when you know who you are and who stood behind you, you don't need permission. You don't need applause. You just need to walk forward and salute. They say news spreads fast. But I had no idea how fast it would move when the helicopter lifted me off the ceremony grounds. By the time we landed at the naval base an hour away, I had 5 missed calls from journalists and 2 emails marked urgent from networks I'd never spoken to. The headline had already broken: homeless woman at military ceremony revealed to be Rear Admiral Katherine Mills. I didn't need to read the articles. I already knew the narrative they were spinning. I was no longer the family embarrassment. I was now the public's redemption arc. They wanted a soundbite, a headline that said I forgave them, a televised hug, a tearful reunion. They wanted the story tied with a bow, but I gave them silence. I turned off my phone and asked for a secure line. We had more important things to do. The digital threat that had emerged coinciding with Grandpa's encrypted legacy required full focus. We worked around the clock. My identity didn't matter anymore, only the mission did. Still, the outside world didn't stop. Apparently, someone at the ceremony had filmed the SEAL commander saluting me, captured the moment my brother looked like he swallowed his own tongue. That clip went viral before sundown. Comment sections were flooded. Her own brother mocked her shameful. This is why you never underestimate a veteran. Salute to Admiral Mills. Some families don't deserve their heroes. And then came the interviews. My mother, always poised, took to a local news outlet and said we were never informed of Katherine's rank. If she had told us, of course, she would have been welcomed. A lie cleanly delivered, polished and practiced. Nathan didn't fare as well. Cornered by a field reporter outside his law firm, he stammered. It was a joke. I mean, she looked like someone who... She looked different. I didn't know. It was just a joke. A joke that cost him. By morning, the firm issued a statement suspending him pending review. Apparently, clients didn't find it amusing. I didn't feel joy. That surprised me. I thought maybe after everything I'd want this, to see them burn while I rose. But I didn't want vengeance. I just wanted the truth to stand. A junior officer brought me a laptop that evening. Ma'am, he said, you're being invited to speak. CNN, MSNBC, even the Times. They're all asking for comment. I stared at the screen. I could have sat there, drafted a statement, written a polished story about pain, betrayal, and triumph. But I closed the lid. I didn't want to perform for them. Not when I hadn't even taken a full breath since setting foot back in uniform. Instead, I stood up and asked the tech team to dim the lights. We had a sequence to decrypt, and I was the only one left who could read Grandpa's embedded patterns. But in the background, the world kept spinning. A reporter stood outside my mother's home that night. "Did you know your daughter was an admiral?" she was asked again. This time, Mom didn't answer. She simply shut the door. My brother, however, posted a long note on Facebook. A desperate apology tangled in justification. I grew up with expectations. I didn't understand her choices. I made a terrible mistake. The comments were brutal. No one bought it. It was too late. And me, I stayed quiet. No cameras, no press conference. Because silence, when used with intention, speaks louder than any speech they wanted me to give. That was my choice, my power. Not revenge, but dignity. And that silence, it echoed. It echoed louder than any insult ever hurled my way. And louder still than any forced apology they tried to offer. They offered me my rank back. The Secretary of Defense himself shook my hand in the secure conference room at Andrews, his voice measured but reverent. "Rear Admiral Grace Katherine Mills," he said, reading from the document. "In light of your contributions and continued service under classified capacity, we wish to formally reinstate your commission, this time permanently." Around the oval table sat men and women in crisp suits, stares on their shoulders, eyes that flickered between duty and disbelief. To them I had always been a ghost. Rumors, whispers, a name that once moved like wind through the corridors of command, but never appeared in photos, never showed up to receive credit. Until now. "Thank you," I said, voice even. But no. The silence that followed was deeper than I expected. Not offended, not outraged. Just stunned. A General 3-star leaned forward. "Ma'am, you've earned more than most ever dream of. Legacy, honor, a platform to rebuild trust in the institution." I met his eyes. I didn't come back for that. A pause, a flicker in their eyes. Confusion, perhaps. Disappointment. "I came back," I said slowly, "because my grandfather's name was about to be erased. Because you, the department he once bled for, were ready to hand his honor to the wrong people. And because no one else would stop it." The secretary nodded. "Then let us correct it. Together." I shook my head. "I lived in the shadows for a reason," I continued. "After Syria, after Task Hydra, after watching men I trained trusted die. Because someone in this very building sold our coordinates to a private contractor. I knew I couldn't serve with a clean heart anymore." The room grew heavy. I didn't flinch. I was offered stars then, too. I turned them down. Because a uniform means nothing if the system it represents is broken. A younger woman, Pentagon legal, I guessed, asked gently, "Why now? Why break cover?" After all these years I hesitated, not because I didn't know the answer, but because saying it out loud would make it real. Because my grandfather told me once I said that, when the world forgets what integrity looks like, someone has to stand where they can see it again. Just once. I pulled out a small creased envelope from my jacket, placed it on the table. It was the letter he wrote me at Annapolis, the one he left with the submarine pin I now carried like bone. I promised him I'd never let our name be used for political theater, or let my silence be mistaken for consent. A murmur of understanding passed through them. "I'm not here for revenge," I added, softer now. "But I won't accept redemption through ceremony. Let the people who stood by him wear those medals. I'll carry his truth." The secretary's voice was low. "And what of you? Where will you go now?" I gave a thin smile. "Back to the coast. There's a diner there that serves a terrible coffee and asks no questions. I'll work the counter and watch the sun rise like I used to before I learned how to fire a weapon from underwater." No one laughed, not this time. And then as the meeting drew to a close, he said something I hadn't expected. "Grace," he said, "not Admiral, not ma'am. I hope someday you'll write your story. Because men like your grandfather and women like you, if we don't tell those stories, the wrong ones get remembered." I stood, straightened my back like I was still in uniform. "I don't need to write it," I said. "I just lived it loud enough. And with that, I left the Pentagon for the last time. The next morning, my name was everywhere. I didn't need to check my phone. The voices outside my window told me everything. 2 reporters stood by the steps of the modest veteran housing unit I'd been calling home for the past few years. Their cameras pointed upward, waiting. One of them kept saying my name slowly, as if trying to summon me like a ghost from the past. Admiral Grace Katherine Mills, he said again. Rear Admiral, homeless. Forgotten hero, mystery. I closed the curtain. Online it was a wildfire. Memes, commentaries, news anchors stumbling over how they missed it. One headline read, "The Admiral we shamed." Another, less kind, shouted, "Was she ever really gone or just hiding?" Some said I'd quit on my country. Some said I was a plant of fabricated distraction. But others remembered. A mother from Idaho wrote on her page, "My son served under her. He said she saved his life more than once. We owe her more than we know." Then came the talk shows. I watched in silence as pundits debated my life, like it was a courtroom drama. "She left after the Syria mission," one guest said. "We don't know what happened, she never gave a statement." A woman chimed in, "And she's never owed us one. That woman went through something none of us can understand. She returned not with fanfare, but to honor her grandfather. That alone tells you the kind of soul she is." But the kindness wasn't universal. On a conservative stream, one commentator sneered. "A woman like that comes from a broken family, couldn't even make peace with her own mother. How do we know she's not exploiting this moment for attention?" And that's when my mother appeared. They brought her on a late-night segment titled "Family of the Fallen Hero, The Inside Story." I watched it alone in the dark. My mother sat upright, perfectly composed, her makeup flawless like always. Her voice, too smooth to be sincere, began calmly. "Yes, Grace is my daughter, but we've been estranged for years. She made choices we did not agree with. Military life, war, secrecy, and then disappearing on us. No calls, no letters. I thought she was dead." The host nodded sympathetically. "But when she returned, you must have been relieved." "I was conflicted," she replied. "It's hard to explain. You try raising a daughter who's always chasing battles, who never stays in one place, who never listens." The room fell still. Then a pause too long. She broke it. She always had something to prove. Even as a child, always competing. I remember when her brother Nathan won his academic scholarship and Grace joined the Navy the same year. It felt like she wanted to spite us. To say, "Look what I can do." Her voice cracked, but not with sorrow, with bitterness. She never came to Christmas. Never showed up when her father died. And when she finally did reappear, it was in combat boots and secrets, expecting applause. The host shifted uncomfortably. "But she's being honored by the Department of Defense. Doesn't that speak to her merit?" My mother's eyes narrowed. Honor without humility means nothing. That was when the tide turned. The internet wasn't kind to her. Clips circulated. People called her the bitter mother ice queen, the reason some heroes stay silent. One former SEAL wrote, "I don't care what family she came from. Admiral Mills saved a dozen of us from certain death. She didn't need your approval then, and she doesn't now." I received hundreds of letters that week, most from strangers, some from former teammates. A few simply said, "Thank you. We see you now." But I didn't answer any of them. I wasn't ready. I wasn't doing this to be seen. I remembered sitting in the hospital bed overseas, watching my hands shake from nerve damage. I remembered the doctor telling me I might never hold a weapon again. And I remembered my grandfather's words scribbled in the margins of the letter he left for me after my first deployment, "Medals rust. But dignity doesn't. Stand for something even if you have to stand alone." I'd stood alone for years. Now the world finally noticed. But fame had never been my goal. All I had wanted was to return one last time, to leave the insignia on the table, to salute the man who taught me that even when no one claps, doing the right thing still matters. Let them argue, let them speculate. I had already made my peace. A few days later, as headlines faded and social media found new targets, I received a letter, real paper, handwritten, not an email or a tweet. It was from a national veterans organization, a formal apology. They admitted their silence, their lack of support, and how they, like so many others, had failed to recognize those who served quietly. Those who didn't seek cameras or medals, but bore the cost of service alone. They invited me to be the guest of honor at the induction ceremony for the newest class of Navy recruits. They offered a speech slot, a spotlight, a stage, but I declined. I don't need a podium to speak truth. I don't need applause to make peace with my past. Instead, I sent a video. 2 minutes, no cuts, no edits, just me in uniform seated in front of a bookshelf that once belonged to my grandfather. I looked straight into the lens. I didn't smile. My name is Katherine Mills. I served. I bled. I lost more than I can say. But I also gained something most people never touch: clarity. I paused. Let the silence weigh on the moment. To the new generation stepping into service, you don't owe the world your story. You owe it your integrity. Protect it. Fight for it. And when the world forgets, you remember who you are. That will always be enough. I ended the video with a salute. No slogans, no fanfare, just the truth. Later I heard the recruits stood in silence after the video played. Some cried, a few clapped slowly, but most just stood quiet still and changed. And that, I realized, was all I ever wanted. Not forgiveness, not revenge, just recognition. For the ones who served and disappeared. For those who were never on the guest list, but who carried the weight of the mission long after others went home. After everything settled, I moved to a quiet town by the Pacific. Not because I needed to hide, I'd done enough of that, but because the ocean reminded me of the parts of my life I still loved. My mornings were simple black coffee, a notebook, and long walks on the shore. In the afternoons, I worked remotely with a nonprofit that specialized in cybersecurity training for veterans transitioning back to civilian life. We taught them not just how to protect data, but how to protect themselves, how to reclaim something after war takes everything. No one knew who I had been, and that was exactly how I wanted it. I didn't hang my medals. I didn't talk about the ceremony. I didn't answer reporters or attend the follow-up interviews. I wasn't interested in being a symbol. I just wanted to be useful. Then one afternoon there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find Nathan. He looked older, tired, in a way that had nothing to do with age. I didn't say anything. I just stepped aside and let him in. He walked in like someone entering a cathedral barefoot. He took in the sparsely furnished living room, the photo of Grandpa near the window, and the empty walls. He didn't sit. "You've really disappeared," he said quietly. "Mom doesn't even know where you live. She's not meant to." He rubbed his hands together, nervous. "You know, I never thought you'd turn it into this. All that silence. The headlines. You didn't even say anything when they accused me of lying." "I didn't need to," I replied. "The world figured it out themselves." He looked down. "You could have destroyed me." I looked at him long. Then I said, "Nathan, you were never that powerful." He blinked. "You didn't make me who I was, and you couldn't destroy me. Not then, not now." He swallowed. "Then why didn't you say something? Why didn't you humiliate me?" And I smiled just slightly. "Because I didn't come back for revenge." He stared, waiting. I added, "You were my brother once. I cared for you, deeply. But you've spent years trying to erase me, and I spent years surviving what that erasure cost. I don't need to punish you. I don't carry that weight anymore." He finally sat down, quiet now. "You want to know why I never struck back," I continued. "Because I already won. Every time I stood back up. Every time I rebuilt myself. Every time I chose to keep going instead of proving myself to people who never saw me." He looked like he wanted to cry, but didn't know how. I leaned forward calmly. "You're not my enemy, Nathan. You never were. But you were never important enough to be my battle either." He left without saying goodbye. I didn't watch him go. Instead, I returned to my desk. There were reports waiting: young veterans who needed jobs, needed tools, needed a chance. That was where I belong now. Not in proving anything, but in building what comes after. A few weeks later, I was invited to a small memorial event held at a naval museum 2 towns over. It wasn't formal, just a gathering of old sailors and their families. People who had stories to share and wounds they still carried in silence. I went quietly, no name badge, no title, just me. There I met a boy maybe 10 years old, wide-eyed, full of questions. He followed me around the exhibit where Grandpa's old submarine plaque was mounted. Eventually I sat beside him. He told me his grandfather had served on the same sub as mine. I asked him, "Do you know what honor really means?" He nodded too quickly, so I pulled something from my pocket. The silver submarine insignia Grandpa gave me when I was accepted to the academy. It had seen battle, had been buried in sand, and survived far more than metal should. I placed it in his palm, his fingers curled around it instinctively. "This isn't a prize," I told him. "It's a reminder of what that strength doesn't come from being perfect. It comes from knowing when to stand up, even when everything tries to push you down." He looked up at me with those same clear eyes Grandpa used to have. I smiled. "Take care of it," I said. "It's not for people who always win. It's for people who choose to rise." He held it like it was sacred, and I stood. The sun outside had started to dip. The ocean breeze was back, and for the first time in years, I felt like I had truly come home. I never imagined I would open my old SEAL training journal again, let alone rewrite it. Back then it was filled with combat drills, mission codes, call signs, and fragments of a woman trying to survive in a world that never fully welcomed her. But now I found myself picking up the pen not to honor a system, not for military glory, but to reach those who've known battles that leave no visible scars. I rewrote the journal for women like me, veterans of war, yes, but also survivors of silence, judgment, and dismissal within their own families. I titled it, Standing Orders for the Unseen. It wasn't a memoir. It was a guidebook on how to breathe when your presence makes others uncomfortable, how to rise when your value is questioned, and how to stand firm even when you're standing alone. There were no chapters on weapons or warfare, just entries about how to navigate a dinner table where no one makes eye contact with you, how to respond to a brother's laugh that slices deeper than any shrapnel, how to rebuild when the medals on your chest mean less to your mother than the pearls around your sister's neck. One line in particular came straight from a night I spent in a Syrian cave bleeding and alone, thinking no one would find me. When you are invisible to others, become visible to yourself. I sent the finished journal to a support group for female veterans, a group I'd never met but somehow always felt part of. Along with the package, I included a letter. It was short, but every word mattered. I was never the kind of soldier that made the front page. I was never the daughter that made her mother proud. But I was always the kind of woman who kept standing. And sometimes, that's all it takes. When the world forgets, you find the place that remembers. It isn't in your uniform or your accolades. It's in the way you stand back up. That's where you belong. After mailing it, I didn't wait for a reply. I didn't need applause, and I didn't want validation. I only hoped it reached someone in the silence between regret and resilience, where so many of us live. I've settled now in a small coastal town, far from the noise of metals and microphones. The ocean doesn't ask about your resume. It just listens. I work quietly for a nonprofit helping veterans secure digital security. It's not glorious work, but it's honest healing work. Every encrypted message I help protect feels like a whisper I once needed myself. One afternoon, Nathan showed up. I didn't know how he found me, but he stood on my porch like a man with more questions than courage. We sat outside the sea wind, brushing away words before they fully formed. He didn't say sorry, he didn't cry. He simply asked, "Why didn't you ever get revenge?" I looked at him. The man who'd once mocked me with laughter now looked like a boy afraid of echoes. I answered softly, "You were never important enough for revenge, Nathan, but I did love you once." He looked away, then nodded. That was all. And strangely, it was enough. Before we say goodbye, I'd love to ask you something. Where are you watching from tonight? Is it a quiet morning with the sun rising gently over your coffee cup? Or a late night where stories like mine keep you company while the world sleeps? Let me know in the comments. I read everyone truly. And if this story meant something to you, please consider subscribing to the channel. Not just to hear more stories like this, but to join a space that still believes in dignity, resilience, and quiet courage. Thank you for spending your time with me today. Wherever life finds you, I hope you carry this with you. Sometimes the miracle doesn't knock loudly. Sometimes it waits quiet, patient until you are strong enough to answer the door. Take care, and I'll see you in the next story. Katherine.